Oliver, I'm going to start with you.
Mhm.
Um, so you've been involved with a lot of the testing around VRS, and can you tell us about the breadth of that and the networks that
Sure.
are involved with this?
Sure. I mean, basically, the VRS testing is a little different than the other testing because we're not really connecting business partners with each other, but due to the fact that we have a very standard, very strong standard and a very strong implementation guideline, we can basically, and due to the fact that basically everybody in the industry can verify nearly with everybody else, or mainly the manufacturers, obviously, but as a request, everybody could send a verification request in the future. We just cannot test with everybody. So it's really a testing between the solution providers, right? And the way the test is set up is that we make sure that our solution providers can talk to each other, um, and then extend this to our customers. I mean, obviously, there are few manufacturers, the big three wholesalers, and the large dispensers that will do their own testing. But by and large, I mean, we are talking about in the first phase that we did 2.5 years ago, we had like 30, 35 verification test cases, 2 dozen lookup directory test cases. Now with verifiable credentials, I mean, that exploded actually the number. And when we go into the version 1.3 of test cases, it will even be more. So we're talking easy 100, 150 test cases that we test against each other with the solution providers. The issue that I see is really that we don't know who's on the playing field, right? In the last set of test cases, it was the 5, 6, 7 big solution providers, but there are many, many more. We
Mm.
need to engage them because the worst thing that can happen is that we have the system all set up and everything, we give ourselves a high five, right? And then somebody's coming out of the bushes and saying, hey, by the way, I have these 100 dispensers in North Dakota. To me, as a German, that's the most remote place in the United States. I'm not sure whether I'm right. Yeah, but wherever they come from, right? Suddenly you have these players in the market that say, but yeah, but I represent so and so many dispensers, right? Or I dispense, well, right, dentists, or whoever is able to send a verification request, and we are taken by surprise. And then, the whole approach is what we need to know who's on the playing field. That's
Mhm.
key.
Mhm. Good. So it's helpful that you all have been working together for quite a while on this VRS. And to your point, we
Mm.
see the same thing in APCIS where someone reads the standard and they interpret it slightly differently, and now you have a problem between two trading partners. But as you're saying, when you start to multiply that effect, when we're talking about networks starting to connect to each other, now you're affecting many more trading partners than just one or two.
Yeah.
So that's a good insight into what's going on in the PI verification world. Alex, I just want to ask you a question, um, and maybe you can reflect on some of the things that are happening within PDG and around tracing. So we don't have a standard for tracing yet. We have a what we believe is a standardizable set of tracing messages. Can you provide some insight into the viability and the usefulness of that?
Yeah, so, we've been working with the tracing schema for quite some time now, and it's really, built off of work that was done at PDG for a couple of years, um, very closely hewing to the statute and to the guidances. And, you know, a, a lot of credit here has to go to Bob for shepherding a lot of the more recent work along and really helping everybody sort of articulate some of the requirements. But essentially what we have is a schema that bakes in a lot of the business logic, and the standards and specifications and schemas, underpinning everything from the G10 of a product that's under investigation, to being able to support multiple products within a single schema. um, what we have is something that's resilient. It's machine readable. It's, I think, something that is really well positioned to address this requirement where I think there's still a lot of uncertainty around how much tracing traffic we can anticipate. And with the very tight timelines involved with trace, and with the fact that it's going to involve different ecosystem participants that have no prior contact with each other, it's really a recipe for a lot of manual processes unless you have alignment on a standard that allows you to support the human beings within that process to you know find the information, source it, send it out, and feel confident that they have ingested a real trace request from a real ATP or a real regulator and are able to respond to it and sort of clear it off of their plate quickly.
And it would be nice if we can get to the same sort of level. I know that the VRS group has been together for a long, long time, and they've
Mhm.
worked out a lot. But that same type of ramp needs to be taken with the tracing area.
Yeah, I get the sense that the VRS was built first and foremost with this vision of, and I mean, Oliver, you were there. You can probably speak to it much more intelligently than I can. But with this notion of being able to deal with high volumes of relatively low stakes interactions, um, and I say relatively low stakes compared to other sorts of compliance activity or compliance communications. Tracing, we've definitely gotten the sense that every interaction is going to be a high stakes interaction. And probably, I don't think that there's been necessarily a strong case for it to be totally automated. But certainly, tooling put in place to support human beings who need to pull the trigger on responses.
David, I'm going to call you out now. So yesterday we heard a little bit about credentialing and how it kind of comes alongside of PI verification and tracing and around the technology part of that. But I wanted to step back to you because there's a whole underlying process and a sort of due diligence that goes beyond that supports that. So once we get into the technology, we need to be able to trust what is it that the issuers were doing when they actually issue these things. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's critical that we know who we're talking to, and then as part of that, at least in the context of what we're doing for DSCSA, that we're proving the right, elements to give a credential that represents ATP status. So that due diligence can't just be a number, right, that you're looking at, or a name that you're looking at. It has to go deeper than that. And so when we realized early on that that was going to be, a significant challenge, then it was a matter of, how do we conquer that challenge, and then how do we do it in a way that we can point back to some type of standard. And when we did that, that research, we basically landed on, and I think it's been referenced a few times, a NIST standard, right? The National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the work they've done, and in looking at where we would fit in to those different assurance levels, we landed on the identity assurance level 2, and basically or IAL 2, and basically what that does is it allows us to, with a very high degree of confidence, say, okay, we've aligned these processes, these checks, to make sure that we can not necessarily have to meet one-on-one, right, in person with somebody, but we can make sure with a very high degree of reliability that we know who we're talking to. We've collected certain information, done these certain checks through this process, and therefore we can say this is who they say they are. And then moving past that to then say, okay, now we know that we're dealing with a company we were expecting to deal with. Now, for the purpose of an ATP credential, making sure that we've gathered the right information to say, yes, this is their, say, board of pharmacy number, right, for a dispenser. That it's, because that's information that people can get to. It's fairly easy to get to, actually, right? And so you don't want to say, oh, this is a good license number, but it doesn't belong to this identity. And so we're able to then further those processes in the due diligence, to make sure that, okay, now we know not only who we believe we're talking to, but that they have control over and own that particular, say, again, the Board of Pharmacy license for that dispenser. So that's really what we're making sure of, is that we can trust that whole process. And of course, for an issuer of credentials, it's important that the industry trust us. And so aligning with the OCI guidance, we've made sure to say, okay, these are the things that the issuer has to go through, and there's a third party audit to make sure we're doing what we say we're doing and that kind of stuff. So we've tried to make that very tidy in the sense of checking all those boxes that an issuer is doing what they say they need to do, and then all the due diligence to prove identity and ATP status is also being done.
Great. So yesterday we had those couple of slides where Alex's daughter had created
Right.
pictures of us, and if you remember, we went through first the acquisition, and so you were on that screen there. But then when I flipped to the next one, yours went away, so you
Yes.
weren't involved with the actual transactions. How do you feel about that as an issuer? Not that we killed you off or anything. We just
Right. And there's still some responsibility going on in the background, right? There's still that
Mhm.
ongoing maintenance of that credential. So yeah, we're not in the picture from a transaction standpoint, but we are still obligated to maintain the credential going forward, right? Is that identity still good? Is that ATP status still good? But I think part of the reason we were illustrated in that way is there's a level of confidentiality that has to take place. And I think you or someone covered it yesterday when we were talking about some of the values or why use verifiable credentials. And it really comes down to that kind of separation of duties, so that the issuer is only involved in the things they need to be involved in from a due diligence standpoint and an ongoing maintenance standpoint. But then, we're out of it from a transactional standpoint. We don't see any of that. And even the information that is available to, say, a wallet is still very limited, right? And so we're not, any role can't correlate or triangulate data in any way. It's completely separated, and that's done for that confidentiality purpose, only giving access to the data information that role needs to deal with. And so I think that's kind of why my picture went away in that, because it was transactional information and I wasn't part of it.
Good.
Yeah, I think we all agree, very strongly that there needs to be this sort of lights out model and separation of duties, and that's sort of what keeps things clean and makes sure that everybody's responsible for their piece and is answerable for their piece.
Mhm. Yeah, this is a very distributed. It's almost distributed upon a distributed after a while, and there's a lot of good information in there. George, I'm going to give you the hard question here. Sorry, but could you speak a little bit to the adoption of credentials? Some people seem to think that it's mandatory, you have to do it, or else something's bad's going to happen to you. Or is this more of does this provide any benefits or convenience to the folks that are be using them?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Some good questions I get a lot. So
Yeah, I can imagine.
let's look. So as you pointed out yesterday, and as we also saw on the screen, like this virtual screenplay. So credentialing is mainly for those who don't want to establish manual processes to verify every time they receive a request or response if the ATP is really is a license in good standing or not. And that's so also we can also look into the area before credentialing in these electronic systems. I think if we would take them out, we only have the GLN as an identifier traveling around. And the GLN is not a verifiable identifier, and of course has also no license status because it's not built for that. And it's of course it's of course not in the law, but also the other systems, how we do it, is also not in the law. So it's just a help to ensure that that basically the ATP status can travel with the request, and everyone who is active in a system can verify it. And at the end of the day, using credentials, accepting requests with or without credentials it's always a compliance decision with the individual trading partner. And so that's basically the status. Regarding adoption, we see that Oliver talked about the cross VRS testing. So the VRS providers for PI verifications are adopting credentialing, integrating this into their system, making it available for usage for their customer base. And large manufacturers, wholesalers are currently using credentialing in their testing environments. We see that first dispensers are getting involved and onboarded. And I think the cross-industry testing and moving to production will increase in the next months. And so from an adoption perspective, everything is prepared, everything is ready. Going through the solution providers down to the trading partners is, I think, the right path. We hear about adoption challenges like credentialing are very expensive and those statements. I think I don't want to go into the cost area too much, but
Yeah.
let me say that what we built in OCI is completely on open standards. And what is interesting is that every OCI conformant credentialing provider is interoperable with each other, and you can take easily out players, or you can change your provider. And what is also nice, everything what we did in OCI is completely public available. So either trading partners can also build their own brew solution, or a new provider can show up, and this will drive competition, and competition usually drives cost massively down. So I think in future the credentialing, or not in future, but credentialing, especially for dispensers level, will be a very cost efficient thing. Yeah.
Great.
And,
So before,
can I quickly add to that? The what Georg said is extremely important, and I think he highlighted one thing I want to highlight one thing is we're doing this now for, Georg, 2.5 years, 3 years now, from the first thought that this might work, right? Getting other people, getting Elizabeth involved from our competitor, right? That was absolutely key, that we get all the people involved and looked at this. And the second thing is what Bob, you asked David, right? It's absolutely key that he's not involved. We can't have another round trip to a central system or any other system, right? If we get a credential in our solution, we can by ourselves verify it. And that's key. If we do another round trip, you have another place where you can break the system. So a decentralized system, something that is well tested, and we're working on this now for 3 years, and something that what Georg says, where players can come in and out and follow a standard, is absolutely key. The worst thing that can happen is that at the end we have 4 or 5 or 6 different ways of proving this, because every solution provider would support every of these methods. That will make it extremely costly. And there will be players who say, no, I don't support them all. I only support the big three or the main 3 versions. And then everybody who's on anything else will not get a response, right? Because the other side will not be able to verify authorized trading partner status. So in the end, we need to agree on one way to do this. And with an open standard, to me, that's the only way this can be done.
Makes sense. So Oliver, I just want to stick with you for one last question before I open it up to everyone else to be able to ask questions. So SAP, kind of a small mom and pop organization. Yep. But if we look at TI-TS exchange through EPCIS, and we look at verification through the verification routing system, and we look at tracing and credentialing, this all starts with a lot of large companies that have the deep pockets to be able to work through these and create interoperable standards and stuff. But as you've seen some of these earlier pieces, have you seen other solution providers come in that support the small community pharmacists, let's say, and others that the benefit of having these kind of standards and solution providers like all of yourselves working together, as you said, competitors working together, but
this is that comes back to my earlier statement. There are a few, right? SAP, we are not really going into the small community pharmacies, right? That's not just not our market. I think it's absolutely essential that we work with these players, right? And we can educate them. I mean, I have regular calls with serialization providers here in Germany, here in Europe, because in the end we need to work together and need to make things work. For the US, that's even more important because, to my knowledge, the only market where we go down to the dispenser level, right, where you need to exchange data with dispensers. And we have this many-to-many relationships, so it's absolutely crucial that we get basically all the service providers that deal with dispensers into these calls and align with them. We've worked with some of our or the other solution providers to set up what we call pre-qualification connections, so that we really enable the other solution providers to send receive messages and exchange them with us. And I hope everybody else is doing the same, working with each other to standardize as pre-qualified connections so that we can onboard dispensers very quickly. None of the dispensers has an appetite to work with whatever the AmerisourceBergens or the Novartis of the world and go through a 4-week test cycle, right? That must be standardized. It must be on board into production right away. And in the end, the large solution providers and the industry, the large manufacturers also need to provide the help. And I think what the wholesalers, for example, doing in providing GLNs to the dispensers is one of these. The people here on the court providing credentials to dispensers is another one, that we just make this work. We cannot go to a dispenser and says, figure it out. That's not going to work.
Right.